And joining us now is MSNBC chief legal correspondent and host of The Beat, Ari Melber. Ari, it's been quite a day, and we're waiting for them, of course, to resume after the lunch break, but it was very dramatic before they broke for lunch. And we've been debating amongst ourselves just how effective and how important were the punches that Todd Blanche landed today in shaking the credibility of a key moment, a key story that, you know, Michael Cohen had sworn to under oath.
I think the punches are building cumulatively. I think Tuesday there were bruises, and today there's blood, to extend the metaphor. They're not done, and this is a back-and-forth process. I was listening to your reporting, following along like everyone. I'm going back in the courtroom next. I was just speaking to our colleague Lawrence O'Donnell, who spoke to MSNBC today as well. I think the collective view is these are moments the jury will remember, and they are instilling or adding possible doubts about Michael Cohen's long-term credibility. As I think everyone knows by now who's followed the trial, the question isn't has he changed his mind and retracted things. Both sides agree on that. That's not in doubt. The question is, does this guy still lie? And if he does still lie about anything, little, medium, or large, can you trust him? And the standard is not, okay, do we have to be convinced that he lies about everything? The standard for the jury and why Blanche is making some progress is, by the end of this, does the jury have reasonable doubt about Cohen telling the truth on elements of the crime? The other stuff won't ultimately matter when they deliberate. It just accrues. But what we saw in that kind of dramatic back and forth as it's been described today, of, well, but you did lie, and have you lied, and why do you sound like this, and a podcast where you might sound allegedly unhinged, all of that accrues to whether jurors go back and say, I doubt whether he's telling the truth about an element of the crime. For example, Trump's criminal intent back in 2016. So I think they are landing blows, Andrea.
Let me ask you, it's Chris now, Ari, if you think there's a kind of a subtext to this whole question, the key question of beyond a reasonable doubt. Everyone on that jury knows Donald Trump. They have an opinion about Donald Trump. But whatever they think about him, he was the president of the United States. He is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. It feels bigger. The consequences feel bigger. The consequences feel like they could go beyond just whether or not, if convicted, he would go to jail or not. So does that, do you think, play into the minds of jurors at all when they're thinking about, does this really rise to beyond a reasonable doubt?
I think it's a great question, Chris, and it's one of those important questions that won't be in the jury instructions. It won't be in the technical written format, but it does hang over this. Here's how I can try to put it as fairly as possible. The prosecutors keep saying, hey, we do business fraud cases all the time. We can show you the examples. You can't just lie to the government about money. And if poor people and regular people and everyone working a hard job in New York doesn't get away with it, why should someone who has the means and wealth and lawyers get away with it, right? That's what they say. And there's an argument there. The counter argument is, this ain't just any other business fraud case because of the defendant, because of what we all see here gathered around the courtroom, and because of the stakes that could matter outside the courtroom. And so I do think that hangs over it. There's also a trial of a prominent Democrat going on right now, Robert Menendez. If you talk to prosecutors, they will say, federal, state, local, they try to do this regardless of party, and being a candidate isn't some sort of legal shield. But to the core of your question, Chris, I think it's a fair question and a fair point. Do these 12 jurors, when they deliberate and they have these doubts, are they more careful, are they more concerned than they might be in another case? And this is, at the end of the day, you know, we have all our lawyers, we talk about statutes, we talk about standards, but we have it up on the screen here. We have the anonymous background of these people. When they go in there, does that, if anything, move the needle a little? Does it make them even more skeptical than they might be if it was John Doe with Doe organization instead of Trump org? Is it a higher bar? It might be, and historians, I think, will wrestle with that forever, because whatever the outcome is, this is the first ever trial of a former president and current presidential candidate.
Yeah, and I think a key part of the prosecution is, and I was thinking about this as I saw the parade, I think the largest parade we've had of members of Congress going into court today, going before the microphones, assailing the system, that this is a system that is fundamental to our democracy, fundamental to why the United States of America was founded. And part of that is the prosecution will certainly make this case. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've been elected to or what you're running for now. There is a system of justice, and that system of justice should be applied equally, whether you're once the most powerful person in the world, right? Or whether you're some Joe who tried to do a shady business deal, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the people coming. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, well, you mentioned the politicians and other public officials who've been here, and I want to be clear because this has been a matter of some scrutiny and debate. Of course, there's nothing wrong with people showing up. We have transparent courts in this country so we can bear witness. We don't get cameras in there. Those of us in television journalism would prefer cameras, but there's a reason why we've all been going in and bearing eyewitness, court reporters, court stenographer, transcript available day of. So the members of the government coming here is fine. I think the clear problem for the rule of law from a nonpartisan perspective is you have members of the government showing up not saying let's find out what the result is, let's honor the rule of law, but already pre-attacking any result that they disagree with. And so I don't care whether you're a member of the government attending Democrat Bob Menendez's corruption trial or Republican Donald Trump's fraud trial. If you're showing up to say, let's observe the process and follow the rule of law, great. If you're showing up with a partisan agenda to undermine the very thing that you're attending while being a member of the government, yes, that's a problem. That's not a political problem. That's a nonpartisan rule of law problem. And I'm not someone who says everything was so great decades ago, but I will observe that didn't used to happen. The leadership in both parties did not used to do that blatantly. And now we have the Speaker of the House and others echoing what Donald Trump has said, which is this result can't be accepted if it disagrees with them. That's not the rule of law.
That's such an important point. But, Chris, I think you asked the most important question, which is with the prosecution having to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, there's a human instinct to also look at this man who's the former president and a potential future president and ask yourself as a juror, are the issues here so important? And, you know, I know it's an important violation of the law, but when you look at the actual facts of the case, does it seem, unlike some of the other indictments, like classified documents, January 6th and the others, does it all get back to, is this such a big deal that we should take away his chance to be president? You know, if one believes, you know, that that's his right, of course, and that he's the candidate and the presumptive nominee, and if you convict him, that could change his whole life and change the life of the country. I mean, there could be a juror on there that's thinking that way.
That's all they need, right? Ari Melber is one juror, and I was having a conversation with people not in our business, but I'm sure like you, everywhere I go, this is all people want to talk about. And they were talking about the fact that most jurors, I think there's a broad feeling that most jurors go in there, they want to do the right thing. They're going to follow the instruction that the judge gives them, but they're human. And you can't separate your life experience. You can't separate the thoughts that are in your head all the time. And frankly, we say it time and time and time again, and I'm going to ask you about this as well, Ari, before we let you go. They only need one. Donald Trump's defense team only needs one to have a doubt, whether it's because, again, of their lived experience, of their concern that this is a guy who was president of the United States and could be president of the United States, or whatever the reason, they only need one, Ari.
They only need one, and after about 18 witnesses, that brings us back to Michael Cohen. If we hear jurors having reasonable doubts about the key elements of the crime, right? You can always think of an alleged crime as a checklist, right? You have the act, you have the mental intent, all the things we've been covering and with our great experts and all of our lawyers and legal analysts and journalists going through. If they have a doubt as to any one element, right, then you don't have a conviction beyond reasonable doubt. And after these 18 witnesses, my observation, not reporting anything from inside the jury room, the jurors don't talk to us, but my observation as of today would be that doubt is probably not from the documents. It's probably not from Mr. Pecker, who came across as a man in a sordid business, who had made his deal, told the truth, and said he still harbored no animus against Trump. I don't think it's from Ms. Daniels, who I think told her story with clarity and courage, and the type of attacks that were launched on her, I highly doubt create reasonable doubt in 2024, nor were they about the core of the crime anyway, legally. But to both of your questions, if there is reasonable doubt, it might have very well been raised Tuesday and today with Mr. Cohen. And the way that the Trump defense, again, I'm just calling balls and strikes here, the Trump defense has been able to raise valid questions about, well, when did you really stop lying? And why did you say you're not obsessed if you wrote you were obsessed? And why did you have a different characterization of a very big event in your life, which was the rejection, the professional rejection of Donald Trump, even before your falling out, that he wouldn't bring you to the White House, which you thought, as the self-declared fixer, would be your payoff. I am not reporting that that means there's no case or that he lied. But I am reporting those are the kind of things, unlike the other crosses we've seen, where if reasonable doubt was raised, it very well may have been Tuesday and today.
And Ari, quick question. Did Donald Trump open his eyes during this particular Q&A? Could you see whether he was paying attention?
I cannot answer that because I'm on the duty going in next, which is why I'm outside right now. But Lawrence and others were in there in the morning.
We have people who really want to get in on this question that you just talked about, but I'm going to thank you, Ari Melber, and remind people to watch The Beat tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern for more expert analysis. He will bring us inside, as he will be this afternoon again, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on MSNBC.